Welcome back to Kings of Columbus on the podcast feed. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis talking about studs, not stud. Have you talked to Stud? Have you talked to Greg Studrawa since he left Ohio State?
I have not. I think maybe Austin has a time or two because I've asked Austin a few times over the last year, like, "Hey, what's Stud up to?" And I think Stud's just like hanging out and watching the Blue Jackets.
Yeah,
he might be down in Louisiana actually.
Let's get him on. We'll get Stud on. We'll get Stud on the show. Talk about some stuff. We're talking defense, though. He's an offensive line coach. We're talking defensive studs. How many do you need? How many does Ohio State have? What's Ohio State's history? Do you win more with a bunch of offensive studs or a bunch of defensive studs? And Landis, you and I have spent some time. We have looked some things up. You have a presentation to make, right? This would be like in 11th grade. Like my daughter did a thing for like a math class where she was doing like some NBA stats kind of thing. Like you're that kind of person, right? That whenever it was like, hey, we're in trigonometry and you were like, can I do something about the dimensions of Citizens Bank Ballpark for my trigonometry project? This is like that.
Yeah. Math was not my forte, but it was easier for me to understand whenever I could put it in the context of sports.
Yeah. There's that thing. There's some movie. It's Tom Hanks. It's in Big, right? He's like, oh, Larry Bird made this many 3-pointers. And it's like, he taught algebra to a kid. It's so wonderful. Before we get into that, this is a lot of Sonny Styles talk. You and I did a decent amount of Sonny Styles talk on a previous Kings, and we can't help ourselves. But we did now talk to Sonny Styles because we have talked to the Ohio State safeties, and we talked to safeties coach Perry Eliano. And I just want to note something. And I think people know by this time, like, I like talking about sports, but sometimes I like talking more about the coverage of sports in our coverage of sports. So we go out to the very first practice, and Sonny Styles is playing nickel safety the whole practice. He's the nickel. Lathan Ransom's the bandit. Jihad Carter is the adjuster, the deep center field safety. And then there is part of this beat that spent a chunk of the interview session with Perry Eliano and Sonny Styles being like, well, we saw Sonny Styles at the nickel the whole time, but that doesn't mean he's going to play nickel, right? Just because we saw it with our own eyes for 2 hours that we were allowed to watch doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. And then you open that door for Perry Eliano, and he's walking through the "it's early, anything can happen" door.
Yeah,
a million times. He's going. It's like it's a revolving door. He's stuck in the revolving door. Anything can happen. It's still early. Anything can happen. He's the nickel safety. Why are we like refusing to acknowledge what our eyes just showed us? Hey, why did you play Sonny at nickel safety for 2 hours in the first practice? We flipped the coin. He's the nickel safety. Why are we trying to act like he's not?
I don't know. I think part of it is, I think sometimes this beat struggles with like talking about things and writing things that would perhaps paint certain players in, I don't even want to say like a bad light, but like to talk incessantly about Sonny Styles, I think is in some way to be like dismissive of the other players who could potentially play safety. And I don't think that's true, but I do think that is in the back of people's minds. And also this beat, I think in general, has a bit of an issue with just writing what people say and not providing any of their own analysis. I like to provide my own analysis. You can think I'm a moron for doing so. And that's totally fine too. But that's how I prefer to do the job. Like Perry Eliano can tell me until he's blue in the face that it's still an open competition and that they're going to rotate and a lot of guys are going to get reps. No, they're not. It's fine. It's not going to happen. It's fine. And it's okay to say that.
Yeah. He's the nickel safety.
Yeah.
And so he's going to move around. I think there's some openings for them to play a corner at that nickel safety spot on some potential matchups. I think we talked about before. Jair Brown and Ryan Turner both worked at that spot. Doesn't mean Cam Martinez is never going to play, but we're going to talk about Sonny Styles a lot. And until our eyeballs tell us something else, because we are going to watch another practice this week. Mm-hmm. If we go out then and then he's like, oh, well, no, he's the nickel safety. It's like, why do you play guys at practice? Do you try to play the guys at practice in the position they might play in the game? Or is it possible that Josh Fryer is going to be a receiver? No.
Well, now you might be. Let's keep an open mind here. You might be onto something.
You are still, that is the day is coming. When you become a football coach and we get to our starting receiver is 6'5", 325. We think he's a matchup nightmare. That day is coming. All right, let's talk about this idea of guys. And because I think there remains some, I don't want to say confusion. There haven't been as many individually talented guys on the Ohio State defense the last couple of years. I think there's a chance there will be more this year. But I think as people saw a defensive coordinator get demoted and then fired after just 2 seasons in Kerry Combs, as they saw a high-priced $2 million defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles last year come in, look pretty good for 11 games, and then the defense kind of falls apart against Michigan, gives us some big plays against Georgia. I think there's a lot of consternation about scheme, and people maybe forget that the talent standard on the defensive side of the ball has not been up to the Ohio State standard. We're going to get into that. But what we also want to get into is, where would you rather have it? Are offensive stars or defensive stars in modern college football more necessary for winning? If you're, and we're going to get into the choice. Does there have to be a choice? But you, Bill Landis, with your PowerPoint presentation, what did you find in trying to diagnose, do the best teams in college football, the ones that win it, do they do it with defensive studs or offensive studs?
Just so for the people who are audio only listeners of the podcast, there is not actually a PowerPoint. You're not missing any slides at the moment. You can watch the show on YouTube if you'd like to and see our 2 faces, but and we'd appreciate that. But there are no slides. But I do have information.
Do you know how to do a PowerPoint?
I mean, when I was in college, like we had to do it a lot. I couldn't tell you. I haven't had to do one since then, and I keep getting reminded how long ago it was that I graduated college. It makes me feel terrible about myself. So I think I could figure it out, but I haven't done it in a long time.
I don't think I've ever done a PowerPoint. I'm almost 50.
Not with your kids, really?
Maybe I've watched them do a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That's like one of those things where it's like, Dad, help me with my PowerPoint. And it's just me sitting at the table nodding for a lot of the time. So there is no PowerPoint, but I couldn't do one, and you maybe could do one, but we're just going to talk because we have microphones, but no screens. Okay.
Yeah.
What did you find?
It's also possible that PowerPoint no longer exists. Willing to entertain.
Like Zoom.
Yeah.
You know, Zoom's dead. Zoom sent out a thing that said, if you use Zoom, we're going to turn your face into a robot, and there's nothing you can do about it. And everybody was like, I'm not on Zoom anymore. We're not on Zoom right now. You saw that Zoom thing, right?
I did not know.
There's a whole thing like Zoom in its little details when you sign the contract. Zoom like added a thing that said, if you use Zoom, we can take your face and your voice and train robots with your face and voice, and you can't opt out of it. And everybody was like, I'm out on Zoom.
Yeah.
So we don't think StreamYard does that. Or maybe I am a robot right now. No, that's not it. This is why we're on podcasts, because robots can be doing anything else. Robots can't do YouTube shows and podcasts, though, yet.
Not yet. Hopefully that day is a long way away. So I want to give credit for this thought, I guess, because it's not an original thought of mine, but it piqued my interest when I heard it. And I don't know, like Bud Elliott, who's at CBS Sports and I think 247 still, I heard him say one time on his podcast that there is a more direct correlation between defensive talent than there is offensive talent when it comes to winning national championships. And I'm not sure how he quantified that, but I was trying to think of a way to do it. So I went with draft info. So I went and looked at I didn't include 2022 Georgia because a lot of that roster is not yet draft eligible. So I did the 8 previous champs of the playoff era, starting with Ohio State in 2014 up through Georgia in 2021. And it's probably an inexact science because like guys get hurt, like different roles develop throughout the season. I just stuck with the guys who started the national championship game and went through and then wanted to see the draft data from those players to see if the defense was in any way better than the offense. So what I came up with was that there were 57 of the 88 offensive starters from those 8 teams were drafted with an average draft position of 81st overall. So 57 total, 81st overall. 69 defensive players were drafted, so 12 more than the offense. And the draft position was also slightly better. It was 70th overall. So that I think in an exercise like this, that is a fairly significant gap between the two, especially the total. Like 12 more players were drafted, but even being 11 spots better in terms of average draft position, when you're talking about the sheer number of players that you're averaging, I think is pretty noteworthy as well. So defense was better total number, defense is better average draft position. And the other thing I looked at was All-American status, and I only counted consensus and unanimous All-American. So consensus is you're on 3 of the 5 main All-American teams. Unanimous is you're on all 5 teams. It was a little tighter there, but there were still more defensive players. There were 13 total consensus or unanimous defensive All-Americans and just 10 for the offense. So in both ways, the defense was a little better than the offense, which I think is a way of getting at, I don't know, probably the best way to say it might be that we don't appreciate how important defensive star power is anymore to winning national championships in a world where quarterback play is so good and offenses are scoring a boatload of points. And those things are important to winning a national championship. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But defensive star power has been, I think, historically and remains very important to winning a national championship.
So this is interesting to me because Bama influences every discussion in college football. Bama influences, people think the SEC is great when it's kind of more like Bama's been great and now Georgia's great. And Bama and Nick Saban were built on defense, and then Nick Saban trained Kirby Smart, and Kirby Smart built Georgia on defense. When you have on the other side the Kirby Smart, so on the College Football Survivor Show, the national show I used to do, my partner and I there did a draft where we drafted like the Kirby Smart team and the Lincoln Riley team. And we divided college football offense and defense, and we drafted 10 head coaches for each team and said, like, hey, who do you think is going to be better over the next 10 years? Which team would you take, right? The defensive example of that is Kirby Smart, who just won the last 2 national titles. The offensive example of that is Lincoln Riley, who has gotten to the playoff and gotten his doors blown off because he's never had a good defense. And Ryan Day is somewhere in the middle, and Ryan Day maybe should be the example of Lincoln instead of Lincoln Riley. Mm-hmm. Are Saban and Smart right that defense is the way to go, or does it feel like defense is the way to go because Saban and Smart are defensive guys, right? Like which is the chicken and which is the egg here? Because then there's another team that I want to bring up as an example, but I do feel like right now in the sport, Saban and Kirby Smart have succeeded at the highest level, and Lincoln Riley has gotten to the highest level and then only proven once he gets there that he can't hang. And those are the most dynamic defensive and offensive options. And when you look at it that way, it's like, well, of course it's defense wins because you have Alabama and Georgia as the examples.
Yeah, but those teams, like, the hard part is, like, I think I agree with you, but those teams are also very good on offense. Like, another thing I looked up was average efficiency for offense and defense, and then this is according to the FEI ratings, just one efficiency metric you can use, like for national champions. And like Georgia was, and Alabama's most recent national championship team in 2020 was a little high defensively, but it was like awesome offensively. It was the best or second best offense we've seen like in modern college football. And Georgia has incredible offense defense balance. I think they found the way to do more with less on offense, but they still found a way to do it. Whereas the star power, like the blue chip ratio and those kind of things are more heavily skewed toward the defense. And that's probably true of Alabama too. I feel pretty confident saying that about Georgia without looking it up. I would feel reasonably confident saying it about Alabama without looking it up, although that's probably a closer number because Alabama does recruit like quarterbacks and skill probably a little better than Georgia does. So I don't know. Like I've been thinking about it all day, like, because we've been talking about doing this podcast for like the last 24 hours or so. And I don't know that I've come around on what is the right way to go about it. But even the more offense heavy national championships of the last few years had really good defenses. It wasn't like, I don't know if you can, maybe this is the best way to say it. Like Alabama 2020 is kind of the only like heavy offensive lean team that has won a national title, and every other one has been balanced. And I think maybe the assumption would be that you got to score points, you got to score points, you got to score points now to win national titles. And that's true, but you have to have a defense to balance that out. I think more often than not, unless you're, in a weird season like Alabama was that year with a bunch of offensive talent playing against an Ohio State team that was missing like a dozen starters.
So let's talk LSU. Let's talk LSU 2019. The 2 draft classes after LSU won the national championship, they had 21 players drafted total, 11 on offense, 10 on defense, 4 first-rounders on offense, 2 first-rounders on defense. So their quarterback, their 2 receivers, and their running back were all first-round picks. Now, Jamar Chase was 1 year later after he set out the year because he was younger. But I guess, so you're calling LSU balanced? Because that is a smoking hot offense. And yeah, they had Patrick Queen and he was good, and Jacob Phillips and Grant Delpit and Kayvon Chasen, and they had some dudes, but this is probably the best passing offense in college football history.
Yeah.
Driving that. Could that LSU team, and that's not sustainable because Coach O wasn't a guy who could sustain it. Is 2019 LSU the blueprint for Ohio State?
Yeah, probably. I mean, that LSU defense was 8th in the country in defensive efficiency. And so I in my exercise, right, I counted the starters. 10 of the guys who started on defense that game were drafted, in that national title game were drafted. And 1, 2, 3 of them were first rounders, 2 of them were second rounders. There's a third rounder and a couple fourth rounders in there. Almost all but 1 or all but 2 of them, are top 150 draft picks. That was a good defense. That was like Joe Burrow receivers and defense. That offensive line wasn't even particularly good. So I don't know. What does quarterback, receivers, and defense with a suspect offensive line reminds me of a team maybe that we're analyzing on a daily basis.
Oh, they're going to win the national title.
Yeah.
It's solved. No worries. Who are the tackles? Doesn't matter. Yeah. Doesn't and matter. Who's it left? Doesn't. So I think that's right, because like Derek Stingley, right, was a starter as a true freshman at corner for that team, who went on to be the number 3 pick in the draft. Mm-hmm. That was just it's an absolutely loaded team that was waiting for a quarterback, and Joe Burrow fell in their lap. Do they have are we approaching a discussion here where if Ohio State wants to win a national championship, they must have more dudes on defense? Is that non-negotiable in your mind?
I think it is non-negotiable. Yeah. And there are probably people listening to this conversation saying Ohio State hung 40 points on Georgia last year. And that is true. And that is maybe that Georgia defense last year was good, but I think a significant step below how good it was the year before. We never got to see that, what I think would have been an all-time matchup between Ohio State's offense in 2021 and Georgia's defense in 2021, or frankly, LSU's offense in 2019 and Ohio State's defense in 2019, I think would have been a terrific matchup as well. Certainly better than what LSU ended up facing that year against Clemson. So it's not I think there's a base level statistical output that you need to be. I think you need to be a top 15 efficiency defense to win a national title, give or take. But it's more about dudes who can make splash plays. I think that's the difference maker for a defense in modern college football. And Georgia has been churning guys like that out. Alabama has been churning guys like that out. There was a time when Ohio State was churning guys like that out, but it just hasn't happened for the last few years. So I think they have, and I guess we'll get into this. We'll have a discussion about this. There are guys on this roster that I think could kind of fit that bill, but I don't know how many of them have gotten there at this point. So I think yeah, it is a non-negotiable, but if you approach it from the sense of individual star talent, maybe even more so than the collective effort of a defense.
And this is going to lead us to a Sonny Styles conversation. But let's delve into where we think the dudes on this team are. And let's go to last year first. So if we were saying splash play, game-changing guys on last season's Ohio State team, and I tried to ask Perry Eliano, the safeties coach, a question about that this week, sort of when it comes to making plays, is it more about scheme and the call that sets up a guy to make a play, or is it just more often than not that a guy just with individual knowledge and talent makes a play on his own. And I couldn't get in there because I guess in the way I asked it, I got the it's both answer, which I think the way I asked it, maybe there was no other, but I'm trying to like what matters more. Because I think the right answer, because coaches talk enough about, right, it's about Jimmy and Joe's, not X's and O's. Like they say that kind of thing enough. I think that is what they believe, that you set guys up to make plays, but then the guy actually has to make the play. So play making dudes, how many would you say Ohio State's offense had last year? Who would be the guys that you would say?
Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Ibuka, CJ Stroud. Like I would include offensive linemen in that, even though it's
I would too.
So like Parrish Johnson, maybe even DeJuan Jones. Like DeJuan was a very good All-American level tackle in some people's eyes. At times I felt like Luke Whippler was kind of that, but maybe not. So I would probably say both tackles, both starting receivers, and the quarterback.
And just the way like the running game, like you would have maybe thought going into last year that TreVeyon Henderson was that. The way the run game went, you wouldn't say that. Cade Stover, not quite at that level. And it's one of the so we're talking about first. So Paris, first rounder. Marv's going to be a first rounder. Emeka's going to be a first rounder. CJ was the second pick in the draft. And frankly, DeJuan biffed draft prep and fell to the fourth round. Natural skills and talent, like that guy's a top 50 pick. And he just screwed it up. So we'll go 4.5 or 5 on offense. How many on defense last year?
There's only one that I would consider, and it's Tommy Eichenberg. And I think there is a nuanced discussion to have between like really good statistical production and like the level of dude that we're talking about. I think there's a difference. So I think maybe Tommy was just like a step short of that. So I probably would say no dudes.
I think I would say no also, because it feels like Tommy Eichenberg and Jim Knowles last year was a perfect marriage of coordinator and player, of skill set and scheme that created a Tommy Eichenberg season that maximized what he is and absolutely was key and served this defense. But he's not Ryan Shazier, and that's not a slight on Tommy Eichenberg. So we're talking 4.5 or 5 to 0, and they almost won the national title. Right? So, okay. And frankly, if, the guy who's at the top of the list on the offensive list, has he been healthy in the whole second half, they might have done it. So, all right, 4.5 or 5 to 0. What do you think it will be this year for Ohio State? Let's do offense first. How many offensive guys like that, playmaking, game-changing, individual talents will they have on offense?
A similar number. I think like Marvin and Emeka again, obviously you're back. I think preseason going into it, I am willing to put TreVeyon Henderson there, I think, with a bank on him remaining healthy throughout the season. So that's 3. And I could probably be persuaded on Donovan Jackson.
Yeah, you can. How hard would that persuading have to be?
Well, I want to because I've been he's a 5-star guy. Of course I'm high on him, but I don't think that he's not, I think, really come close to maximizing yet. And he'd have to do that this year to be the kind of player we're talking about. But I'm bullish on the idea of that happening. So what's that at 4? The quarterback is probably a dude. To the extent that CJ was, maybe not, or maybe he does it differently. But I think there's enough benefit of the doubt that Ryan Day has earned as a quarterback developer to assume that, because even I would say CJ by the end of 2021 was a dude. And even if it's Kyle McCord, Dever Brown, if they're not at that level to start the year, I think by the end of the year they could be. So I'm probably at like a 5.5 with the offense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not there. You're higher on this running back room than I am at this point. I think it'll be good. You think it has a chance to be great. I want to see it a little bit with Trey, so I wouldn't go there yet. I'm there with Donovan Jackson, and we can remind people again that you and I have been talking about a series on guards Gardapalooza
Yeah.
for like 8 years. Gardapalooza. We were talking about Gardapalooza when the guards were Billy Price and Pat Elflein.
Yeah, it was tied in too with the Browns, right? Wasn't it like
Yeah.
it was like
Joel Bitonio
and
Wyatt
was it
Teller.
Wyatt Teller?
Yeah. So Gardapalooza is still maybe coming your way. I don't know. It's like next on Kings of Columbus, Gardapalooza. I don't know if that headline will do it or not.
Click. See ya.
180-minute interview with Donovan Jackson. So we might get there. So I might, the quarterbacks, like I don't disagree. I'm also not going to apologize for like not putting the quarterbacks there yet. I want to see a little bit. Because again,
fair.
How many guys in a year would you say in college football, how many quarterbacks are that are guys, like guys that change? I mean, it might be like 8. I don't think it's 30.
Mm-hmm.
So what if the Ohio State quarterback this year is the 14th best quarterback in college football? That might be enough to win the national championship, but I don't know if I would be because like I think our dude definition, because we're not doing this on recruiting rankings. We're doing it on NFL draft stuff. It's not what you were coming in. It's what you developed into by the end of your career. And is it unfair to say that our shorthand really is kind of like first rounder? That it's like, okay, if you were like a top 50 guy and positionally maybe, but like at least in consideration to be a first rounder?
Yeah, in consideration for first rounder, or I guess like depending on the position, as you said, like in consideration to be among the first players selected at your position.
Yeah. So it's like, do I think the Ohio State quarterback this year will be that? Because it's about where you are this year, right? I don't know. I'm certainly not a for certain yes, but possible. So anyway, we're like between 3 and 5 on offense.
Yep.
Okay. How many on defense? How many defensive guys will they have like that this year?
I mean, it's a hard conversation for me because it's all projection. Like I don't think I am in general high on the prospects for the defense this year, but it's all projection. It's not much of it is based on things that have been established already. But like if the vision that I have for the defense comes to fruition, I think JT Tuimoloau is a dude. I think Mike Hall is a dude. I think there's another level for Tommy Eichenberg to potentially get to that would make him one. Sonny Styles, that puts me at 4. I don't think I'd say any of the corners at the moment. I think they can be a good group, but not a great group or tremendous group or a 2019 kind of group. I think Lathan Ransom has that potential. So and then like CJ Hicks, if they're going to play him, I think has that potential. So I think it could be upwards of 6 or 7.
So I went with 3, but that's a good 3. Like I think 6 as a ceiling is not crazy, but I think 3 as a floor is also not crazy. Yeah. And we just said the team that almost won the national title last year had none. So this is like what we're talking about. They have not been at the talent standard. They just haven't. And now maybe they are again. And I just think people need to understand how potentially seismic that is. Absolutely seismic. So I think if you say, you and I have a deeper JT Tuimoloau discussion to have. I was looking up some PFF, like it's not pass rush win rate, but it's sort of like a percentage, and it's like
it's underwhelming.
It's underwhelming.
Yeah.
It's not like top 10 in the Big Ten. It's not close to like, it's not like Sam Hubbard level,
right?
Even like much less Bosa and Chase Young. There's a discussion there. Now, what you do as a pass rusher is not all that you do as an edge guy. And I have, as a shorthand, do you agree with this? Like my shorthand for JT often has been a Cam Hayward comparison. That Cam Hayward, I think, is sort of like probably the most physical defensive end that he played end at Ohio State. He did play some tackle, but he's not Chase Young, but he's a Hall of Famer. He's going to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Cam Hayward is unbelievable. So that's like, well, I don't know. JT, I mean, he's not Chase Young. He might only be Cam Hayward. It's like, oh my, Like, yes, but that's not like straight blowing up guys on pass rush. That's like Jadeveon Clowney, great against the run. Sometimes edge guys who are great against the run get underrated in some ways. So like, do your job, whatever. But like, I would put JT on this list right now. I'm not 1,000% sure that we'll have him on this list at the end of the year. Probably. Same with Mike Hall. I think you have to crack the door on Jack Sawyer. I agree with your next level for Tommy Eichenberg. I put one corner because I think an assumption that either Denzel Burke or Jordan Hancock or Davis Igbinosun can get to that level, can get to the Marshawn Lattimore, Denzel Ward, Bradley Roby, close to that level. I think that's a pretty good bet. I'm not sure which one it'll be. I think it might be Jordan Hancock. It's just like Jordan Hancock, who all preseason as we found out during the course of last season, by the end of the year, it's like, oh yeah, no, he was going to start. Because like oh, we really missed him. Oh, he was really going to play. Oh, he was going to be in the rotation. It's like, oh, he was going to be a starting corner. He's going to play every snap, and then his season blew up by injury. So what Jordan Hancock, we have not seen it. We've seen a version of Denzel Burke at his best. We've seen a version of young Denzel Burke, like third-year Denzel Burke, healthy, has a chance to be a first-team All-American, I think. Mm-hmm. But also, we have no idea. Right? Do we have any idea what good Jordan Hancock looks like?
No. That is my problem with this entire conversation is I don't think we have any idea. Well, I guess that's not true. I think we can project what the best version of JT and the best version of Sonny kind of looks like. I don't know what the best version of Jordan Hancock looks like, only to say that I think it could be good. I think it could be first round level. He was a top 100 prospect for a reason.
So 3 to 6 in a world where offense is also probably 3 to 6. Like, are we getting there? Like, is this the return of enough defensive dudes for Ohio State to compete at the highest level?
It should be. I mean, whether or not it is, I don't know. Like, my confidence level on that, I think is pretty high that it will be. Like on a 1 to 10, I think it'd be like a 7 maybe, which I think is pretty high at this stage of the game. And it's like, if you look at, they had a pretty substantial dip in defensive recruiting for a couple of years. It started with like a 2018 class that was rated well and just like did not pan out. And then like 19 and 20 were pretty bad. And like they missed some guys and missed numbers of positions. 21 and 22 was excellent defensive recruiting. And that should be bearing fruit this year. And I think we started to see some of it last year with the second year players who I think a lot of them took a step forward. And if you combine that with some holdovers like a Tommy Eichenberg and a Steel Chambers, a Lathan Ransom, who's a little bit older than some of those guys, supplement them with transfers like Davis Igbinosun and Jahad Carter, who have played a decent amount of football, in Jahad Carter's case, quite a bit of football. Yes, it should be that. That's why there's, I think anyone who is extremely excited about the prospects of what this defense can be, I think are on the right path, because that's the way it should be. If you're confident, I don't know, I guess it depends on your confidence level with how close they can get to maximizing that. But I think it's certainly the closest they've been to striking that balance since 2019.
I also have a new threshold. Landis is wearing a Philadelphia Eagles t-shirt that is a photo of 5 great Philadelphia Eagles defenders from the late 80s and early 90s. Reggie White, Clyde Simmons, Eric Allen. Can you make a shirt? Are you good enough to get on Landis's shirt?
Yeah. Because
they don't put defensive guys on shirts if they're pretty good. That's pretty. Playmaker. Like, you've got to be a playmaker. So I do think in the end, the defensive player that I feel the strongest about entering the season for Ohio State, who will be a playmaker, is Sonny Styles. He is number 1 on my list. Is he number 1 on your list?
He is number 1 on my list because he is the guy that can do the most. And honestly, it's like CJ Hicks might be 2 on that list. And that's not just like buying all the available stock in former 5-star prospects. They're a couple years into this now. We've gotten to see them run around and do some stuff. Height, weight, speed, range, coverage ability, physicality, like both of those guys are different. Sonny is probably a notch above in terms of being a little bit of a freak, but I think CJ Hicks is right there with him, especially for what like a modern linebacker needs to be. So, yeah, Sonny is one, and if you're going to tell me that CJ is going to play significant snaps, I might put him two.
I am slightly confused by this conversation because you, am I not correct, are also a pretty staunch Steel Chambers backer? Yes?
I think, yeah. Oh, I think Steele is good. I don't think CJ Hicks should wipe out Steel Chambers from the jump. I think that Jim Knowles should find a way to play them both. And if over the course of time it becomes apparent that this defense is much better because CJ Hicks is ready to roll and he's a better linebacker, then give him more of it. But like I've throughout my time covering Ohio State, there have been young players who have been blocked by older players who aren't as good as them. I don't know that I feel that way about Will linebacker at the moment. Now, if CJ gets out there against Indiana and like rips someone's head off, my mind can change in a snap. Like I'm fully aware of that, but I do want to give some deference to Steele, who I think has been a pretty good linebacker for them.
Are you in on my Steel Chambers CJ Hicks comparison to 2014 Curtis Grant and Raekwon McMillan, who basically split the middle linebacker snaps down the middle as a senior and a true freshman?
I am. I think we might have talked about that, but my only pushback on it was that Steele is better than Curtis Grant. Like Steele is better than Curtis Grant ever was.
We have more linebacker conversations to have.
Yeah.
Talking to Sonny, I asked Sonny about being a playmaker, like what it takes. So he said this: know your job, film study, and Perry Eliano was all over Sonny Styles' football acumen and football IQ. Mm-hmm. This guy is built. This guy also knows the game. He is an incredibly put together 18-year-old, like from just an emotional and like, what's the thing? Like emotional, how you have good emotion. Don't they call that? Don't they have a thing like emotional something or other where you're good at your emotions? He's very smart. Yeah. He seems like he's 25. So, and he's in a football family. He knows the game. Mm-hmm. So, know your job, film study, anticipation, and trust your eyes. So I asked Sonny about his play from the spring game because he cut in front of a ball and almost had a pick. And I said, like, is that an example of your anticipation and trusting your eyes? And he said, actually, I hesitated a little bit on that play. And if I hadn't hesitated, I would have picked it off and I might have taken it to the house. So he thought that actually was an example of him like not doing it enough, because I can remember sometimes to shout things in a press box in an unprofessional manner. People know who I am by now. I may have done something during the spring game when he made that play. I might have made a sound that was like, because that's it. It's like, what are we talking about? It's a guy knifing in front of a throw because he made a read, and then he has the physical skills to get there and making a play out of nowhere. And no offense to anybody on the field, Steel Chambers had an awesome pick against Georgia in the semifinal, where it's like, how do you cover running back out of the backfield? It's teaching tape what Steel Chambers did there, right? Mm-hmm. So this is not taken away from that kind of thing at all. But sometimes dudes just got a dude, and that Sonny play like encapsulates, that's it to me. That's a Von Bell, Ryan Shazier, Malik Hooker, Joey Bosa, Chase Young. I'm just a guy and I did a thing kind of game-changing play almost that I don't think we've seen from this defense in 2019. And he knows it, and he knows he was a half inch away from it, and he's gotten this much smarter and more confident over the course of the summer and what he's going to do this August. And that's it. Am I making too much of one not quite interception?
No, I don't think so. It's like all we have to go off of with Sonny at the moment, but it goes back to the projection point. I think it's fine to grab that and extrapolate it. And it's not just like we haven't seen that on a defense since 2019. We haven't seen it at that position since 2016. It's been a long time since they've had because I wouldn't even know, like Jeff Okudah was a really good college corner. In hindsight, like how much of his success was tied to Chase Young, probably a little bit of it, but I don't want to take anything away from him. I don't know. I don't know the teams feared him, and maybe it's hard to fear the corner position in general. I think you can fear safeties who can cover a lot of ground. And they have not. They've had some good safeties. Like Jordan Fuller was a very good safety. Ronnie Hickman at times was a good safety. But I don't know that they had a guy at that level of defense that has been feared. And I think that Sonny is that. And the thing that I like that he talked about when we talked to him after practice on Tuesday, like I think it was you, right? I asked him like, what kind of player, what safeties do you watch? Which NFL guys do you study? And I like two things. One, that he picked Cam Chancellor and like Sean Taylor, guys are like, I don't know, like older guys who were in their prime, like when Sonny was a younger kid. So that I think speaks to like his study of the game. But one of the things he said I liked about Cam Chancellor was like his spatial awareness and the way that he could kind of sense things as a bigger safety. And I don't know, that to me is just like something people don't appreciate typically. Like it's less tangible. It's not a guy who lays the wood when he's hitting people or a guy who gets a lot of interceptions. It's like, oh, I really like the way that guy operates in space. It's like, oh, well, that's great because I think Sonny Styles has that too. So that to me told me that he is in tune with the kind of ways that he can impact this defense, which is just being a 6'4", 200, almost 230-pound guy who is blessed with the ability to cover a lot of ground and be disruptive, even if that doesn't equate to a bunch of picks or even a bunch of tackles. I think the presence of a guy who can just cover that much territory does a lot for the defense.
It's like point guard stuff. The way you see the floor, you see things before they happen. You understand routes and what's about to happen and how the quarterback is thinking. And if you want to make plays, you have to be a step ahead. And being a step ahead usually requires two things. One is, and the smarts and this film study to understand what you're seeing, and then the physical skills to get there once you see it. And I do think sometimes you can be so good at the film study that even if you don't have the physical skills, you still get there. And sometimes you can be so physically gifted, even if you don't see it ahead of time, you can still get there. When you have both, which is what the Buckeyes might have here with this 18-year-old player, that is when the magic happens.
Yeah, and that's like Jim Knowles' entire thing, right? I think this was again you asking him stuff when we talked to Jim Knowles in May or whenever that was, and he talks with them about like Wayne Gretzky. Don't go where the puck is, go where it's going to be. And I think collectively, that's where the defense takes a step this year. Tommy Eichenberg was a guy who got it like immediately last year, and that's why he was so productive. I think more guys will get that this year. But to your point, when you get that and you're also the height, weight, speed athlete that Sonny Styles is, you could have a little bit of a freak show.
All right, so let's go back and let's make sure people truly understand just how bad the defense has been. It's hard. Do you find that discussing Ohio State defense with fans can be complicated sometimes because there is such a defensive tradition here, and honestly, the program has flipped, and that there still sometimes are standards or expectations or longings for a certain style of defense that, again, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have the standard or the expectation, but you also have to understand how Ohio State's changed as a program and how the game has changed overall at this level. And right, do you feel it sometimes?
I do feel it. And like, it's aside from like the Ohio State Buckeyes, like the secondary name that people would throw around when it comes to Ohio State football is like Silver Bullets for a reason. It's like the identity of the program for a long time. So yeah, I do find it challenging. Part of it is the way the sport has changed, but even with the way the sport has changed, there's still a way to play good, effective defense. And Ohio State has come up short of that in half of Ryan Day's tenure.
All right. So this is a little breakdown. My PowerPoint is not quite as in depth as Landis is, but I can do basic math. So this is what I did. I did it in 3-year chunks. And the reason I did this is because Ohio State has not had a defensive player drafted in the first round in the last 3 NFL drafts, right? So 2023, 2022, 2021. So I did 3-year chunks going back the last 2 decades, 7 chunks. How many defensive players they had drafted in the first round and how many defensive players they had drafted overall. Okay. The last 3 drafts, they've had 0 first-round picks off the defense and 7 overall picks. The previous chunk, 2018 to 2020, they had 5 first rounders and 15 overall picks. The previous chunk before that, 2015 to 2017, 6 first rounders and 12 overall picks on the defense. Before that, 2012 to 2014, 2 first rounders and 6 overall picks. That's right, the end of Tressel, the year with Luke, the start of Urban. So this is like before the 13 recruiting class wins the national title and has the awesome 2016 draft class. So a dip there. 2009 to 2011, 2 first rounders and 13 overall picks. So again, in a 3-year period, almost twice as many picks as they had the last 3 years. 2006 to 2008, 4 first rounders and 10 overall picks. And 2003 to 2005, 2 first rounders and 12 overall picks. So again, by first rounders, the last 7 chunks, 0, 5, 6, 2, 2, 4, 2. Overall draft picks, the last 7 chunks on the defensive side of the ball, 7, 15, 12, 6, 13, 10, 12. So top end and depth, it's a drop, man.
Yeah.
And it is a big drop. Do those numbers surprise you?
No, because I did similar research around draft time earlier this year. So I did not go back as far as you did, but I think I did it by recruiting class, like the last 4 recruiting classes compared to the 4 before them. And it was a pretty steep drop off. So I'm not surprised to hear it. I know why it's happened, but I'm not surprised to hear it.
I think in the 2024 draft, I think they could have 4, 5, 6 defensive players drafted, maybe more. So again, it's a reminder. Now, how many first rounders? I'm not sure. We'll see how the corners play. We'll see if a corner pops and goes like Marshawn Lattimore did, like Hancock could do that. I think Denzel Burke wouldn't be a pop and go. He'd be a 3-year starter and go, which is amazing. Could JT be a first rounder? Absolutely. Most mock drafts right now are projecting JT as a first round pick. Could Mike Hall pop? Possible. Could Jack Sawyer pop? Possible. So I do think this is the end of this. And I do think in the end, Bill, these numbers should embolden Ohio State fans because I think it's over. Now,
do you really?
Well, on the Buckeye beefs that I just did earlier in the week, a lot of questions about the Jim Knowles defense and defensive recruiting. So we're talking about this 3rd-year class, as we said. That was a good 2021 defensive class. JT, Mike Hall, Jack Sawyer, Jordan Hancock are all guys. Denzel Burke, all guys from that class. And we're seeing it pay dividends. Has that continued the last couple years to the same extent? No, it has not. But they happen to have Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks as 2 really talented Ohio guys that were sitting right here in the backyard. Very helpful. I could not be more on the Kenyatta Jackson bandwagon as the 3rd defensive end this year. You know, Davison and Bignosin as a transfer, like Lathan Ransom, if Lathan Ransom would stick, like I do think this might be a little tiny peak, but I think the general level, I do not think it will, even if it drops, I don't think we will be back in a world of 0 first-round picks and only 7 overall picks in a 3-year period for this defense again anytime soon, even in a world where they're missing on Caleb Downs and Keon Keeley and Kingston Viliamuwasa and all the guys they wish they were getting in recruiting and aren't. I still feel like they're ahead of the game compared to where we were with this absolutely legitimate, we know why it happened, we all saw it coming, dip that frankly has held this program back for the last 3 years. And I think that low ebb is over.
I think you're right. At least I think there's reason to believe that. And this is a tangent for sure to the conversation we're having. But the part of me that has a little bit of a pause is the way the staff is structured. An imbalance between offensive and defensive assistants just in general, but then also recruiting prowess. So I think that'll have to be addressed sooner rather than later. But if you're going to tell me that it is, and by that I mean like add another full-time defensive assistant, somebody who's a butt kicker on the recruiting trail, figure out what you're doing with your defensive line coach. If you're going to tell me that those things are going to happen, then I would be as confident as you are that there is not another dip coming.
I covered this on the Beefs podcast. I gave my thoughts on this. People can go back and listen to it. Say more. Where are you with this? How dire do you think this is? What are the specific changes that you would make? And how difficult of a situation do you think this is for Ryan Day?
I think it's pretty difficult. I guess maybe I would start with this. Like, I do not think it is inherently wrong or bad, whatever, to have a defensive coordinator who is more of a schemer than he is a recruiter. But the problem is that Jim Knowles is that. And then there's only 3 other defensive assistants. And like, I know they have Justin Scott, but I think like Larry Johnson has lost the fastball a little bit when it comes to landing specifically premier defensive ends. And then it's like Perry Iliano and Tim Walton are your other 2 defensive recruiters. And I think Tim Walton's done a pretty good job. Whether or not it's fair to lay safety losses at the feet of Perry Iliano or if there's extenuating circumstances, I don't know. But he's the guy whose job it is to bring in premier safeties, and it's not happening. So you have a coordinator who is not an out there recruiter. You have a defensive line coach who is less of an out there recruiter than he used to be. A safeties coach who is, I think, maybe fairly doing an okay to good job. I don't think he's doing a bad job. And then I think a corner recruiter is doing a pretty good job. And that's not enough. I like they need another body. One, I think they need. I mean, I guess it's James Laurinaitis. I don't know, but they need somebody to be like the linebacker recruiter that is not Jim Knowles, because it's not his strength. And then I think they need to think long and hard about defensive line and where they're going to go from here, with Larry Johnson on the tail end of his career and not getting the same results on the trail that they used to be. Meanwhile, they have 5 offensive assistants, right? Offensive line, running back, receiver, tight end, quarterback, plus Ryan Day, like plus Parker Fleming, who's a special teams coordinator who like helps with the defense, but his specialty is offense. So there's just a tremendous imbalance there. It's like my biggest criticism of Ryan Day is how he has built the staff, not necessarily like the competency of the coaches, but just the way that things are not balanced between offense and defense, specifically when it comes to bringing talent into the program.
We're going to keep talking about this because we're on the same page about this. One thing I noted on Beefs, the 2016 staff that brought in the 2017 recruiting class that had 6 out-of-state top 100 players on defense. Kerry Combs at the top of his game as a recruiter, Larry Johnson at the top of his game as a recruiter, Luke Fickell at the top of his game as a recruiter. So my main, like, Luke Fickell recruited Baron Browning out of Texas and then left before Baron Browning got to play for him. And Baron Browning was like, Bill Davis, why did you leave me with Bill Davis? But Luke went and got him. Like, Luke, right?
Yeah.
It matters. And as I always say, like, I think assistant coaches are eminently replaceable if you replace them. It's not like Ohio State's like, well, there's nobody out there. There's nobody out there that we could hire that would come here and recruit better if they don't exist. That's not the case. It's not the case.
It's not.
There are decisions to be made. You and I are in agreement here. It's a very, I think we have a podcast. We have like an off-week podcast in September, maybe, of what are the 5 best things about Ohio State football right now, and what are the 5 things that you would change or you need to be on alert for? And again, I wouldn't say that are wrong. What are the 5 things that are wrong with the undefeated number 2 Ohio State Buckeyes? Like, we're not going to play that game, but you can be better. You always can be better. Okay, I think that's a legitimate thing. The other research I did about elite defensive players, first round picks, defensive side of the ball, the last 3 drafts, 29 different teams have had a first round pick. Ohio State is not one of them. Only 2 programs have more than 2. So obviously there's a bunch with 1. The teams that have 2 first round defensive players the last 3 years, Miami, Penn State, Alabama, Iowa, Oregon, Clemson, Washington. So you have a couple people in the Big Ten, and then you have Alabama and Clemson that Ohio State is compared to on the national scene. The only 2 programs with more than 2, Georgia 8, Michigan 4. And it just so happens those are the 2 programs that right now today Ohio State is most compared to, because those are the two teams they lost to end last season. So they haven't produced as many defensive stars as the two teams they lost to end last season. But they're not horrible, right? I mean, they're not like, it's not, but also they're below their own standard. But I did find it interesting. Like when I went to do this, you knew Georgia was going to be a gazillion, but it was a little interesting to me that Michigan's second. Because Michigan, when you think about it, right, it's Michigan's Aiden Hutchinson, obviously, Dax Hill, Mozzie Smith last year. And who's the other one?
Is it David Ojabo?
No, because he wasn't a first-round pick because he got hurt. He would have been a first-round pick, but then he went in the third round. I'll have to think. I'll have to go back and research my research. But what do you think about that idea? Is it fair? I don't know if it's fair. Are we? Whether it's fair or not, are we comparing Ohio State to Georgia and Michigan when it comes to this discussion?
Yeah, I think so. And Michigan, I guess, is a new entrant into that conversation. I'd probably throw Alabama in there too, even if they're not on the list that you just laid out of teams that have had more than 2 draft picks. And it does make me wonder, because Ohio State has infinitely more offensive firepower than both of those teams and offensive draft production than both of those teams. Is this slight imbalance in defensive stars the difference between the programs? I don't know. Maybe that's too far of a stretch to go with it. But those are the teams that I would compare them to. In addition to Ohio State's own standard, which is, I guess, one thing as an aside, it speaks to the excellence that Ohio State was operating with not that long ago when it comes to producing defensive talent. That we're holding them to this standard. But yeah, I think that gap needs to shrink. Do they have to match the 8 from Georgia? No, not necessarily. They have to have more than 0. I don't know if they have to have 4 like Michigan has, but you have to have more than 0.
I'll give you $1 if you can name the other Michigan guy. He was the 21st pick in the 2021 draft.
21st pick in the 2021 draft, a Michigan defender.
Defensive line. Now it's only 75 cents since I gave you another clue. I will give you 3 American quarters.
I don't know.
Kwity Paye.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about Kwity Paye. Colts, right?
Yeah, Kwity Paye. My people in central Pennsylvania have a little bit of a Pennsylvania Dutch background. I have some Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah, me too.
People know it's German.
Yeah.
So if you were Pennsylvania Dutch, you would say that name, Kwity Paye. Hey, Kwity Paye was a first-round pick out of Michigan. Back in the Indy Colts picked him in 2021.
The Landis is a very popular Pennsylvania Dutch last name. Yeah.
Do you have anybody in your family who talks like that about Kwity Paye?
I probably do. My grandfather had 11 brothers and sisters who I never met, so I'm sure they're out there in the Lancaster area somewhere.
I'm looking for impersonations on this podcast, and that one is completely lost on the entire audience. That is just for me and you.
That's borderline Scottish.
Yeah. Hey, I was in a fantasy football league 25 years ago with people in that area. Someone drafted Don Marino, and that was my friend and I will just talk about, hey, I'm going to draft Don Marino. But Kwity Paye is such a good name. Yeah. So that's where Michigan is. It's just funny. It's hey, how come Ohio State doesn't have more defensive stars? These two programs that they are compared to that are the best currently at producing defensive stars. Okay. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. This has been a defense-first program, I don't know, until Ryan Day took over. What would you call the Urban Meyer program? Was Urban Meyer's program, I'm not calling him Urban Myers, was Urban Meyer's program defense first, offense first, built on balance? That man loved to talk about balance. But if you would have said Tressel defense, right? Maybe Coop, I don't know. Would you have said Coop was more off? I mean, Woody defense, right? It's traditionally a defense-first program. I don't think anybody would dispute that. But when did it flip? 2019, 2018? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question, actually, about Urban, because Urban is known for his offensive ingenuity and ushering the modern era, helping usher in the modern era of the spread. I don't know. I think with Urban, I would not go offense or defense. I would just go star. It was a star-led program, and maybe they had they probably had more on the defensive side of the ball throughout his tenure than they did on offense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those, it's hard. Urban has often pointed to the recruitment of Von Bell as the moment that told him, okay, we can do this here. And then it's like, what did Von Bell turn into? A playmaking safety for a national championship team. And Caleb Downs, KJ Bolden. And it's like, like that. It's like, what would that look like? It's like, oh, okay. I hope that crystallized it for everybody.
Yeah.
As good as they were in 2014, it's like, take Von Bell off that team. Now, you might have been okay because Joey Bosa was still tearing people's arms off. But man, Von Bell was good. Wasn't Von Bell good?
He was very good. Maybe I think perhaps even a tad bit underappreciated in the moment for how good he was.
I think so too. And I remember writing about and talking about, like, you would see the defense lined up to be Joey Bosa at defensive end, Darren Lee at linebacker, and then Von Bell as a safety right behind him. It'd be like in a diagonal on that side of the field. And to me, if you were a quarterback and it's like, okay,
ball's going the other way.
Like Joey Bosa is going to rip my arms off. And then if Darren Lee blitzes, he's going to rip my legs off. And then my torso will throw a pass that Von Bell will intercept. It's like, congratulations. Good luck playing that defense. So that's what we're talking about. Is it harder for them to have defensive stars when they now are an offensive program now?
No, I don't think, like, inherently, no, I don't think so. And maybe, I don't know, it'd be an interesting question to ask some of the defensive guys they miss out on, but like, I don't think Ohio State saw a dip in the acquisition of defensive talent because they were so good offensively. I think it's more about the staff stuff that we talked about, because they've gotten really good defensive players during Ryan Day's tenure, that 21 class and 22 class being the best example of that. Now, a part of that is like homegrown stuff, like CJ Hicks was in your backyard, Jack Sawyer was in your backyard. If those don't happen, are they capable of getting equivalent talents from elsewhere in the country? I think that's a fair question. So there was a little bit of luck involved there. But no, I do not think that I don't think it's an excuse. I don't think being an offensive first program is an excuse for coming up a little bit short and acquiring defensive talent.
What do you think their reputation is? Because I do feel like maybe Lincoln Riley has had to fight this a little bit. Like, as good as Lincoln of a coach he is like, our defensive players like, yes, I must go there. And I know Barry Alexander's transferred there. They got a bunch of guys in the transfer portal, and they're going to recruit Southern California, and they're landing it. They got that one safety that everybody wanted, right? So, I mean, they're getting dudes. But I feel like he probably leans harder that way. It's just one of those things. And I'll be curious to see. I think people wonder if it's going to happen with the Jim Knowles defense. Again, at Big Ten Media Days, I asked, when we had the Marvin Harrison Jr. podcast, I asked Marvin about, like, why a receiver wants to come here. And I was trying to get to, is it about Heartline or is it about something else? And he just went into a long answer about, like, the offense that they run here, that Ryan Day runs. And it was just like an articulation of, like, why an offensive player would come here. Like, scheme, standard, style. I don't know. I don't think the defense would have something to articulate in the same way right now. And it is one of these things. Sometimes you have to be great at something for the best players to want to come play for it.
Yep.
And it's like, well, how can you be great at it if you don't have the great players? This is potentially like a humongous year for the defense to lay something down that is definitive, that might be aggressive, right? If you get the best version of what a Jim Knowles Ohio State defense looks like, do you think that could help them land some more dudes down the road?
100%. And I don't know. I thought maybe we'd see that pay, because they were, I know the end of last year was a disaster, but they were much better on defense last year. And, like, it looked like a fun defense to play in for the majority of the year. And I thought that might bear a little more fruit with this recruiting class. Maybe it has. But I think that kind of, so long as they're good, I do think that kind of stability helps them in the long run. It's like, what were you selling them on previously? It's like Ryan Day had, if you include 2018 when Day was only the head coach for the first 3 games of that season, but that is recently enough that I think that's still fresh in some recruits' minds. Like, since that point, Ohio State's on its 4th defensive coordinator. So there's just been no continuity. And the defense has been fairly different from Greg Schiano to Jeff Hafley to Kerry Combs now to Jim Knowles. So it's like, what could you possibly sell them on? Jim Knowles was showing guys Oklahoma State tape last year. Like, I don't want to go to a school that's showing me tape from another school. You know what I mean? So I do think that is the key here. Like, set aside what I said about the defensive staff stuff and how I think they need to find more balance there. Like, Jim Knowles needs to establish a defensive identity for Ohio State, similar to how he did at Oklahoma State. If Ohio State's defense was rocking like Oklahoma State's was at the end of Jim Knowles' tenure, I don't think they'd have much of a problem attracting defensive talent at all three levels of the defense, but they're not quite there yet, which makes this year all the more important because I think they can get there with the collection of talent they have on hand now.
And you have to be careful. It's always one of those things. The reason to win a national championship is not to get better recruits. The reason to win a national championship is to win a national championship. Mm-hmm. Recruiting should bring you championships. Championships should not bring you recruits. So you don't want to put the cart before the horse here. But the defense needs, the defense needs to show people what it's about. And it is one of these things. And again, we talked about this on Beefs a little bit. Can Jim Knowles be over aggressive or whatever? It's like, it's hard because I think guys want to play for aggressive defenses and aggressive offenses. So again, that doesn't mean that Jim Knowles should dial up a blitz that he thinks might not work just to entice the number 56 defensive end from Tennessee to come to Ohio State. It's like, hey, well, sorry we lost that Notre Dame game on that ill-timed blitz, but that recruit sure thought it was cool. That's not how you're supposed to coach. But there is something at play here that is about the long-term success of them getting back to their own standard on the defensive side of the ball. And the point, like, it can't be underestimated because when you talk about what's the Ohio State offense, it's Ryan Day. Ryan Day is the offense. The offense is Ryan Day. And then everybody, Hartline's a huge part of it. Alfred's a huge part of it. But everything circles around Ryan Day. There's no Sun on the defensive side of the ball. There's all these. So we've gone from he's 18 to he's the most likely playmaker on the defense to he is the center of the defense's solar system. Now, Sonny, hey, would you say that you're like the sun, like a big fireball, like a big star, and Lathan's like a Mercury, and maybe JT he's like a Pluto, whatever, right?
No, it can't be.
Way
Pluto.
to go, Bill.
Pluto's too far away.
JT, he's like Mars. Mars is big.
There you go. Yeah.
Jupiter's big. Mars is just red. The Scarlet Planet. All right. So this is the last thing. So did we decide should the goal is be great at everything? Like if that's just like, what's the Ohio State standard? Great at everything. Cool. Good luck. That's where you are.
I think where I've landed on, there's baseline defense, offense, right? I think you need to find a way to have efficient, explosive offense. But I think like the rules of the game make it such that you don't necessarily have to be star laden to be that. And I think Georgia is the best example of that we've seen recently.
You are such a Stetson Bennett apologist. I can't stomach this.
He was good, man. I can't explain why he was good, but he was good. And if I had to pick a side to have the majority of my star power, I would pick the defensive side.
Have you always thought this? Did you arrive at this through your PowerPoint? Is it something that's emerged over watching Ohio State the past couple years, or is this in your gut and your soul?
I think it has emerged with me watching Ohio State, like get on the doorstep with elite offense, but not having enough to get over the hump, and the shortcomings there being on the other side of the wall.
It's hard. I still think I'd take offense. It's an offensive world. Do you think it's college football? True or false? College football is an offensive game.
True.
Does
football is,
yeah, that's true. Does that not the middle school team that you're going to eventually coach? You're going to grind out some 9-6 wins, and
that's right.
Kirk Ferentz Jr. over here. But does that mean if offense is the name of the game, does that mean everybody's kind of good at offense, and maybe it's harder to separate yourself? And if defense is not the name of the game, then when you are good at defense, boy, does it stand out.
Yeah, I think that's it. Everyone's good at offense with the exception of Iowa.
Can we clip that out?
Yeah, it's how many how many pieces can you put on the other side of that chessboard to counter what those offenses are throwing at you? And I don't think you need to go 11 for 11. But he can't be going 0 against 11. Like, you got to have the 3 to 6 that we were talking about earlier in the episode. I think that's what. Is that a hard and fast rule? No. Like, I think there are going to be teams that just have dynamic offenses who get hot, stay hot, and win a national title. Maybe the defenses are a little suspect, but I think by and large, the teams that will more often than not win national titles are the teams that can find those handful of difference makers on defense.
So when we think about, and I mentioned this to you earlier when we were getting ready for this pod, the 2016 Ohio State team. And on Buckeye Retalkables, back on Buckeye Talk, we had done a rewatch of the Ohio State-Michigan game from 2016. And I said that offense had more in common with a Woody Hayes offense than it did with a Ryan Day offense. And watching that offense, which was Curtis Samuel left, Curtis Samuel right, the rest of the team down at its knees begging Curtis Samuel to save them. And he did in the Michigan game and during most of the rest of the season. It's hard to wrap your head around. But that defense had Marshawn Lattimore, Garyon Conley, Denzel Ward, Malik Hooker, Tyquan Lewis, Sam Hubbard, Nick Bosa, Jerome Baker, Jalen Holmes. Unbelievable. You would take that version of Ohio State? And again, like, better offense, got to be better. But like that kind of lean, because I do kind of think if that's what Ohio State was selling in this day and age to fans, if we think they're mad about the defense not being good enough and they were trying to win like that, I think people might be going even crazier. Like, how are we playing offense like this?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I don't think I would take that team couldn't throw the ball. You have to be able to throw the ball. You don't have to be a throw first team necessarily. I don't think you have to be like as prolific as Ohio State has been throwing the ball, or as prolific as LSU was in 19 or Alabama was in 2020. But yeah, I think you need to be able to throw it with, I don't know, like average efficiency. And I don't think that Ohio State offense was doing that year.
I think like 11 guys drafted off that defense. So Marshawn Lattimore, Malik Hooker, Garyon Conley, Denzel Ward, Nick Bosa went on to be first-round picks. Draymond Jones was a third-round pick. Tyquan Lewis was a second-round pick. Jerome Baker was a third-round pick. Sam Hubbard was a third-round pick. Jalen Holmes was a fourth-round pick. Raekwon McMillan was a second-round pick. You're talking like 10 guys in the top 3 rounds that basically make up that entire defense. That is not that long ago. So again, that's not even Chase Young. Like, I'm sort of saying, listen, we can't live in the where's my Chase Young, Jeff Okudah defense world. How come Ohio State's not producing the number 2 and number 3 overall picks in the draft off their defense anymore? I think I'd take a Draymond Jones, Marshawn Lattimore, Malik Hooker, Sam Hubbard. And listen, that's a lot of Ohio guys too. Some of this is some of it's luck. Right? Raekwon is huge there. That's a huge recruiting win to get Raekwon. Right? But there's a lot of Ohio guys on that defense in 2016 that made them really good. And sometimes that's, I don't know, is that luck or is that something else? Developed here. And
it's probably all the above, I guess. I guess I want to give people like an idea of how champions have looked. If the question is like, would you rather have elite offense or elite defense? I don't think it matters what you'd rather have. I do think you have to have both. So I think like the average offensive efficiency for championships is 5th in the country. The average defensive efficiency for champions is 6th in the country. On offense, all but one were top 10. The other one that wasn't was 2015 Alabama. On defense, 7 of the playoff champions have been top 10 in efficiency. The 2 that weren't were Alabama in 2020 and Ohio State in 2014. But everyone that Alabama was 22nd and Ohio State was 13th. Like, they were still pretty good.
Okay. All right. So let's end it with 2 questions for you here. This is primarily about individual standouts, game-changing, play-making guys on the defensive side of the ball. Wrapping this up, do you believe that Ohio State will have enough of that defensively this season?
I do. For a couple of reasons, like the third year 2021 guys combined with the second year 2022 guys, as we discussed, and like as much as like cliche as it might be, and not the most exciting talking point in the world, like I do think second year in the system means quite a bit for Jim Knowles with this collection of talent. So I think they will collectively be better and more consistent, and there will be around a handful of guys who will reach the level that we're talking about.
All right, 1 to 10. 1 is no confidence. 10 is extreme confidence. How confident are you in that idea for this season?
I'm at like a 7 right now.
All right.
Yeah.
Future, beyond this season, where are you with that same defensive question? Game-changing, playmaking guys to make a difference.
Probably slightly lower. I mean, I would make it like at a 6. Like I think, to your point, as you mentioned earlier, I think like next year there will be enough holdovers to sustain. My questions are beyond that.
Yeah.
So I would go a little lower, like a 5.5 or a 6.
Okay. Yeah, it's gonna be. This is a culmination again. When you I think Cincinnati is a decent comparison. That was one of the schools I looked up too. How about this for a stat? The last 3 years, defensive players drafted. Ohio State is 0 first round, 7 overall. Cincinnati is 1 first round, 8 overall. The last 3 years, Cincinnati has more defensive guys drafted than Ohio State does.
Luke Fickle, baby.
Georgia has 19. Georgia has 19 total.
Georgia's ridiculous. Yeah, it's insane.
So, but I don't think, again, I mean, Georgia would take Marvin Harrison Jr. too. So you don't have to be as good defensively as Georgia. I do I'm curious about what the future holds for them defensively, but I do think the worst is over. I really do think the worst is over. So I think Ohio State fans should listen to this and again be heartened. But we have to be realistic about what these last couple of years have been. We just have to be.
Yeah.
And it's not blaming players. Some of it's circumstance in the crossover from Meyer to Day, because you felt that in the 19 class and maybe a little bit of the 20 class. You felt the carry. It's a little bit ironic that for everything Kerry Combs didn't do as a coordinator, you felt his absence when he went to the NFL in the recruiting at corner. That fell off. Like when you talk about Jordan Hancock here, Kerry Combs got Jordan Hancock here, right? That's a win that he left for this program. And Tim Walton seems to be continuing that, but they need some guys to pick it up on the recruiting trail. But I think the worst is over.
Yeah.
Because again, in the end, you're not surprised by what this past we all saw this coming, right? Did we not?
Yeah. I was going to say maybe the Kerry Combs thing. Maybe that's why Ryan Day shouldn't have thrown him under the bus in a way that made it impossible for him to retain him, because he was so important to bringing talent into the program. But that's a conversation for another episode.
Matt Barnes, do you think he should have kept Matt Barnes?
No.
Remember Matt Barnes?
Yeah, Matt Barnes, who's big defensive adjustment, was sometimes playing 2 deep safeties, but otherwise they were doing all the same stuff. Yeah.
It's hard because I do think in the end, if Kerry Combs leaving for the NFL helped create the talent dip on defense. And then he came back and ran that defense that was experiencing a talent dip that was caused by his previous absence. And if there hadn't been the dip, then maybe what he was doing, which is kind of just playing defense, might have worked, because it's kind of what they were doing before. And then it just turned out in a world where their talent wasn't as good, you had to scheme it up more. And then that wasn't he was good at.
They couldn't scheme. Yeah, the 2019 defense was, we're better than you.
Yeah. Jeff Hafley got a head coaching job out of it. Jeff Hafley had nothing to do. Jeff Hafley got here, was all right, what's this defense look like? And they're we got Chase Young, you got Jeff Okuda. He's I'm going to be a genius. Got a head coach. Kerry Combs helped drop these guys in Jeff Hafley's lap. Jeff Hafley's here 1 year, gets a head coaching job out of it. Kerry Combs comes back, suffers for the dip, basically does the same thing Jeff Hafley does, and gets demoted and fired.
Yep.
Just to be clear on what happened there.
Yep, that's exactly what happened.
They had to bring in a schemer. They did. So, okay, that's where they are. We needed to lay it out. We got more stuff coming. This is the place to be. You can watch our YouTube show. Find the YouTube channel. You go to the YouTube thing, youtube.com. You type in, what do you type in? Landis?
You can type in Landis if you want. It might be more efficient to type in the podcast OSU.
Oh, yeah. Or that.
Yeah.
And you'll find us. This is Kings of Columbus in the podcast feed. If you're listening on the pod, so grateful. If you're watching on the YouTube show, you got to see Landis's shirt. And maybe someday he'll be wearing, well, no, everybody knows you had a baby, right? Is that how private or how personal are you? Do you talk about your personal life on the show usually? Talk about your baby?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Yeah, maybe someday your baby will be wearing a shirt like when he's a teenager that'll have like JT Tuimoloau and Tommy Eichenberg and Jordan Hancock and Sonny Styles on it.
Very possible. The strong Penn State contingent on my wife's side of the family might make that a little difficult, but we'll see. It'll be a fun battle between all of them and all of his school friends who will be huge Buckeye fans.
You know what's fair? He could also have a shirt with Chop Robinson, Kalen King, Abdul Carter, and Curtis Jacobs, and Danny Dennis Sutton. Is it Danny Dennis Sutton or Danny Sutton?
Danny Dennis Sutton.
That guy's good too.
Yeah.
Penn State's defense is going to be really good. So anyway, we appreciate you guys listening, whether you're watching, whether you're listening, whatever you're doing. Thanks for being part of it. We'll be back with another Kings episode later this week. For now, for Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of Columbus.